What if I told you that a single book could shake everything you thought you knew? That a few verses, read in silence, read in pain, read in hope, could begin to answer the questions you were too afraid to ask? This isn't a story about religion. It's not about conversion. It's about discovery. About a man who opened a book he never thought was meant for him and found himself on every page. This speech is about a journey, raw, real, and unexpected. It's about mercy where there should have been judgment, discipline that didn't feel like chains but wings. It's about unity across borders and a stillness so powerful it changed everything without saying a word. If you've ever questioned your purpose, if you've ever felt lost in a loud world, if you've ever wondered whether truth can still find you, stay with me. Because what I found in the Quran, I didn't expect, but it found me anyway. And it might just find you too. Let's begin. When I first opened the Quran, I expected ancient stories, distant rules, maybe even something that wouldn't feel relevant to my life. But what I found hit me like a quiet thunder. It was real, raw, and shockingly current. There were verses that spoke directly to struggles I thought were unique to me, unique to now. Loneliness, confusion, heartbreak, pride, ego, regret. It was all in there, not just mentioned, but dissected with precision. It was like looking into a mirror I didn't know I needed, one that reflected not just my face, but my soul. The Quran didn't feel like a book that was 1,400 years old. It felt like it had been written yesterday for the world I'm living in today. It didn't come at me like a lecture. It spoke like a father who sees the road you're on and gently steers you away from the cliff. The language, the rhythm, the metaphors, they had a weight to them that I didn't expect. I've read books that try to give you life lessons, but this didn't try. It just was. The lessons didn't shout, they lived in the silence between the lines. I read a verse about hardship and patience, and suddenly the pain I was carrying felt understood. I read about justice and truth, and it shook something inside me, made me question the lies I'd learned to live with. What shocked me most wasn't just the relevance, but the precision. It didn't just say life is hard. It showed me how to face it, how to stand tall with dignity and grace. It didn't just say be kind. It challenged my definition of kindness, made me realize that mercy is power and restraint is strength. It gave me clarity in a world built on distraction. And in that clarity, I found a voice speaking directly to the questions I was too afraid to ask. The kind of questions you ask when the lights are off and no one's around. The kind of questions you don't say out loud because you're not sure anyone has the answers. Somehow, this book did. And it didn't scream them, it just was them. Not in a way that told me what to think, but in a way that reminded me what I already knew deep down. There's something that happens when a book doesn't just speak in general terms, but speaks to you like it knows what you're going through. That's what happened when I started reading the Quran with an open heart, not looking for arguments or answers, but just sitting with it. I didn't expect it to be personal, but it was. And I don't mean personal in a vague inspirational sense. I mean there were moments where I felt like I wasn't reading it, it was reading me. It was calling out thoughts I'd buried, fears I hadn't spoken, mistakes I'd glossed over. And not to shame me, but to guide me. Verses would show up at just the right time, in just the right way. And I'd sit back thinking, how did it know? The language wasn't sugar-coated. It was clear, deep, and direct. It didn't flatter me, it refined me. It didn't just talk about life, it walked me through it. There were lines about pain and healing that met me in my lowest moments, and I swear I could feel something inside me shift. Not because I was being told something new, but because I was being reminded of something I'd lost. Like a compass being reset. I started to realize this wasn't just a book. It was a conversation, one where I didn't have to say a word to be heard, where my silence was answered with wisdom, where the struggles I thought were mine alone were suddenly shared. And here's the thing, it wasn't loud. It was gentle, powerful but gentle, like someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth. There's a verse that says, "Verily in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest." And when I read it, I wasn't just reading words, I was living them. My heart had been loud with worry, with guilt, with distraction. But in those pages, it got quiet. And in that quiet, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. Peace. I didn't expect to find that in a scripture I didn't grow up with. I didn't expect to feel seen in a book I hadn't believed was for me. But it was like the book had been waiting for me to catch up, not to judge, but to remind me that I was never alone, never abandoned, and never beyond the reach of something greater. When you grow up in a world that constantly measures your worth by your mistakes, your failures, your weakest moments, it's hard to believe in the possibility of being fully forgiven. We're told to move on, but not really taught how to heal. We're told to change, but no one shows us what real mercy looks like. So when I came across the Quran and saw how often it speaks about mercy, not once or twice, but over and over again, I was stunned. It wasn't just mentioned at the end of a chapter like a formality. It was the opening. Every chapter, almost every line begins with the reminder that God is the most merciful, the most compassionate. That repetition did something to me. It chipped away at the wall I'd built around my own heart. It started to convince me that maybe forgiveness wasn't a weakness or an escape, but a path forward, a strength. The Quran doesn't speak of mercy as a reward for perfection. It speaks of mercy as the nature of the one who created you, who knows you in your worst moments and still invites you back. That idea hit me hard because we live in a world that throws people away for their sins. One mistake, one wrong step, and you're labeled, judged, cast aside. But here was a book telling me no matter how far you've gone, the door is still open. That your worth is not defined by your past, but by your willingness to return, to grow, to seek truth. And when I read stories of people who had fallen low, real low, and were still embraced by divine mercy, I didn't just feel inspired. I felt safe. Safe to admit I was flawed, safe to hope, safe to believe that change was possible, that I could be more than my shame, that I could be forgiven, not because I earned it, but because the one offering it is so full of mercy it overflows. That's when I understood this wasn't just about religion. It was about healing. It was about being given a second chance, a third, 100th. And not just being tolerated, but being welcomed. With every verse about mercy, I started to breathe again. Not because life suddenly got easier, but because now I knew no matter what happened, I could still find my way back. Discipline is a word that often feels like a burden, like restriction, like something that takes away from your freedom. That's what I used to believe. I thought freedom meant doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. But the more I lived like that, the more trapped I felt. Trapped by my impulses, by distractions, by regret. And then I came across something in the Quran that flipped the whole concept on its head. It didn't preach discipline as punishment. It presented it as a doorway, a way to rise above the chaos and actually take control of your life. It taught that real freedom isn't doing what you feel in the moment. It's having the power to say no when your desires want to take over. It's having the strength to stay on course when everything around you is pulling you off track. The Quran doesn't shy away from the truth. It tells you straight. This life will test you. You'll be tempted. You'll fall. You'll want to give up. But it also tells you that you've been given the tools to fight back, not with anger, not with self-hate, but with discipline rooted in faith. That kind of discipline doesn't feel like chains. It feels like armor. It's what protects your peace, your purpose, your future. When I read about prayer, fasting, honesty, humility, not as rules to follow blindly, but as acts that train your soul, I saw them differently. I started to understand that self-control isn't self-denial, it's self-respect. The Quran shows you that the strongest people aren't the ones who conquer others, but the ones who conquer themselves. That line stayed with me because I'd spent so much of my life trying to control everything outside of me without realizing the real battle was internal. The discipline the Quran teaches isn't about perfection, it's about direction. It's about picking yourself up each time you fall and getting stronger every time you do. It's about choosing long-term peace over short-term pleasure. And once you taste that peace, the kind that comes from restraint, from consistency, from knowing you're walking a path with purpose, it becomes the kind of freedom you never want to let go of. That was the unexpected gift I found, that the more I disciplined myself through these teachings, the more I actually felt free. I always thought religion was something that separated people, something that created walls between different cultures, races, and beliefs. That's the narrative I grew up around, but when I started reading the Quran, something shifted. It didn't begin with division, it began with humanity. It didn't begin with labels, it began with connection. It was like reading a message that didn't care what passport you held, what language you spoke, or what skin color you had. It spoke to you as a human being. And what hit me the hardest was how much emphasis the Quran places on the value of every soul, the unity of all people, and the danger of arrogance and tribal superiority. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect a scripture to be so clear, so bold, in saying that no one is better than another except by their character, their righteousness, not their wealth, their race, or their background. The Quran calls people brothers and sisters. It speaks of nations and tribes, not to boast or battle, but to recognize one another. That one idea, recognition over rivalry, was like a key turning in my mind. It told me that differences weren't a threat. They were a sign, a reminder of the beauty in creation. And suddenly I started seeing through new eyes. The pride I used to hold on to, the us versus them mentality that crept into so many areas of life, it started to dissolve. Because the more I read, the more I realize we've been sold a lie, that the other is your enemy. But the Quran was telling me no, the real enemy is division rooted in ego. It didn't just speak about peace, it guided toward it. It didn't just tell me to tolerate others, it told me to honor them, even those I disagreed with, even those who wronged me. And that message was radical in the best way, because it was a call to rise above, to not mirror hate with hate, to not fall into the traps of history where people fight without remembering why. Instead, it offered clarity. It showed that unity doesn't mean sameness. It means standing together on the foundation of justice and mercy. And that kind of unity, that deep spiritual unity, is something I didn't expect to find. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And I knew that this message, this truth, was bigger than borders, bigger than names. It was human. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from shutting out the world. It comes from tuning into something deeper, something higher. When I first approached the Quran, I did it like I approached most things in life, trying to analyze, trying to debate, trying to control the outcome. But there came a moment when I stopped trying to read it and instead just listened. I didn't expect much. I thought it would be like any other book, full of ideas and stories that I could take or leave. But in that silence, in that stillness, something began to move. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. It was like a whisper that didn't just touch my ears, it touched my core. Sitting with the Quran in silence became more than a habit. It became a moment of truth, a moment where the noise of the world faded and all that remained was what was real. No distractions, no filters, just the words and me. And in that space, I found clarity. I found a version of myself I hadn't met before, a version that wasn't performing, wasn't pretending, wasn't protecting, just present. And in that presence, something strange happened. I started to feel transformed. Not because I had mastered the text or memorized the verses, but because I let the words reach me in a place I'd been guarding for years. There's a verse that says, "Indeed, it is a reminder for whoever has a heart or who listens while he is present in mind." That one line became my reality because the Quran doesn't speak to the distracted mind. It speaks to the heart that's finally ready to hear. And when you hear it, not just read it, but really hear it, it does something to you. It rearranges your priorities. It opens wounds you didn't know needed healing. It gives you answers to questions you never fully formed. That kind of silence isn't empty. It's full of meaning, of peace, of truth that doesn't need to shout to be powerful. And what surprised me most was how that silence followed me. Long after I closed the book, it stayed with me. A calm confidence, a groundedness, like I had touched something eternal and walked away marked by it. Not in a way that made me better than anyone else, just more aware, more awake, more alive. So here we are, at the end of a journey that really has no end, a journey into something I didn't expect, something that didn't just challenge me, it changed me. I thought I was just opening a book. I didn't know it would open me. What I found in those pages was more than stories, more than verses. I found mirrors, I found questions, I found answers. I found discipline that felt like freedom, mercy that felt like home, unity that felt like truth, and silence that felt like God was speaking directly to my soul. This wasn't about religion in the way the world often talks about it. This was about coming face to face with something pure, something unshaken, something that reminded me of who I was and who I could become. To anyone listening who's searching, who's hurting, who's wondering if there's more, just know the answer might not shout, it might whisper. It might show up when you least expect it, in a place you never thought to look. And when it does, don't run. Sit with it, listen, let it reach you, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with lightning. Sometimes it arrives in a verse, in a breath, in a moment of stillness, and that's where everything begins. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart, for staying until the end. May your journey be filled with light, with peace, and with the strength you didn't even know you had. Good luck out there, and may every step you take bring you closer to the truth that was always waiting for you. Thank you.